I'm glad that you know who I am, and I hope that everyone has an opportunity to sign into the Zoom through your Zoom app on your phone. That's really important because we'll be doing polling and it will be boring for you and disengaging if you won't be able to participate. All right, everyone. So I'll ask everyone to keep yourself on mute. So please make sure to do that. And if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. If you can't hear anything, or if there's something unclear, or if there's like an issue, you can unmute yourself and interrupt me. Otherwise, type your question, comment into the chat, and I'll get to it during a break in the presentation. Okay, so let's talk about how you can effectively seize leadership in hybrid and remote work. We'll be using cognitive science, as you kind of guessed from all the information, for IT, GRC, and auditing professionals. So that is going to be the focus of the presentation. Now, here's the shape of the presentation so that you know what you can anticipate. What we'll start with is some data. Obviously, it's very important for ISACA members, IT professionals, auditing professionals to have data. So we'll have quite a bit of data on what people actually want and how people prefer to make decisions and what they actually want in hybrid and remote work. So we'll be talking about that first. Then we'll be talking about some mistakes that I typically see in hybrid and remote work. So I've helped 21 companies transition to hybrid and remote settings by now. And you've probably heard I have a best-selling book out about this topic called Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, which is the basis for this presentation, and which you'll get if you want a copy at the end of the presentation. Now, I should mention that the resources for this presentation, for those folks who have not been able to register for some reason or are watching it on video after the presentation, are going to be at tinyurl.com/DAE event. So again, tinyurl.com/DAE event, which is going to be right below me. So you can type that in and you'll fill in your information and you'll get a copy of my book, The Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, about this topic. Well, without further ado, let's get to the presentation itself. So I want to start by talking about decision-making. How do we make our decisions? Now, let's say after this presentation is over, you go home and you want some delicious dessert. So you open your freezer and you see you have an option of 2 ice creams. And one ice cream says that it contains 10% fat, and another says it's 90% fat-free. So 10% fat or 90% fat-free, which of those sounds more appealing to you? And we'll have an opportunity to do a poll about this topic. Let's see. So this is the first poll out of a number that we'll be taking. So please go ahead and vote on which of these ice creams sounds more appealing to you, 90% fat-free or 10% fat. See, most of you participated, over 80%. I'll give 5 more seconds for those folks who haven't made their voice heard yet. All right. So we see that about 3/4 of you prefer 90% fat-free, and 1/4 of you prefer 10% fat. Now, you are all mathematically inclined people. You understand that 10% fat is 90% fat-free, and that 90% fat-free is 10% fat. When I present this to human resource folks, I need to explain to them more what I mean. But this is the same thing. 90% fat-free is 10% fat, 10% fat is 90% fat-free. But we have a much stronger preference on average for 90% fat-free. Now, why is that? Why do we have such a strong preference for the same thing, just expressed in different words? Well, the reason is a framing effect. That's a framing effect. How we see information and how we make our decisions, how we interpret it, is very much influenced by how the information is presented. So if something is presented as 90% fat-free, it's much more appealing to the larger majority of us than something that's presented as 10% fat. It's what we stress. It's what we emphasize. It's what our attention is turned to. So we need to really understand that and understand that that is going to frame and shape our perspective on hybrid and remote work as well. So we need to be aware of how our perspective on hybrid and remote work is being fundamentally shaped by how we perceive it, and how leaders at your organizations are going to be fundamentally perceiving hybrid and remote work from their own framing. And the key thing to think about hybrid and remote work is to frame it as disruption, not a loss. I see very many leaders seeing hybrid and remote work as a loss, instead of seeing it for what it is, which is a disruption. So framing it as a disruption brings an opportunity to consider how you can take advantage of this disruption. Leaders are more used to taking advantage of disruption. If they see it's a loss, it's a problem to be solved. It's not a problem to solve. It's an opportunity because it's a disruption. And the disruption that offers a major chance to maximize certain outcomes which are very clearly associated with remote work and hybrid work: productivity and engagement, productivity and engagement. In order to do that, we really need to put aside our assumptions, our habits, our preferences, because our assumptions and habits and preferences are rooted in the traditional style approaches from January 2020 and earlier. And we need to focus on really what are our business objectives and outcomes going forward. So what's the business case for hybrid and remote work? Whether within your own team of IT professionals, auditing professionals, whether when you're engaging with other stakeholders, you need to make a business case for effective hybrid and remote work. So you need to focus on business objectives and outcomes as it relates to your specific context. And therefore, that really includes maximizing productivity and engagement, even if doing so makes us personally uncomfortable because we have certain personal preferences that may not align with our business objectives. And in order to do that, we need to overcome decision-making cognitive biases on the future of work. We'll talk about what those are, and integrate best practices on innovative work arrangements. So integrating best practices on innovative work arrangements will be about 2/3 of the presentation. Well, the latter 2/3 of the presentation. So most of the presentation will be devoted to that. Now, let's talk about the data. So there are 8 major independent surveys done from organizations like the Harvard Business School, Society for Human Resource Management, and other organizations which don't have a stake in the outcome about what is the reality of people's preferences and desires around hybrid and remote work. And we know that 75% to 85% of workers don't want traditional office-centric work, depending on the survey. 25 to 35%, again, depending on the survey, want full-time remote work. And of course, the numbers are even higher for people who are in IT professions. 40 to 55% would leave their job if forced to come in full-time. So a lot of people would leave their jobs. Something like 8% would quit. People report they would quit on the spot, and something like 40 to 55% would highly actively look for a new job. Over 70% are less likely to leave if offered substantial remote work. We know that remote workers are more productive. So it's not only better to retain them and recruit them, but they're also quite a bit more productive. On average, they work about 20 hours more per month. Now, you might wonder how that is. Well, it's because they don't have to do the commute. Don't have to drive to work for an hour and drive an hour back, be stuck in traffic, right? Take the time to put on fancy clothing, take the time to make sandwich or whatever other thing you take to work, take the time to arrange babysitting for their kids or whatever other things they need to do. So there's a lot of efficiency, and people are definitely willing to work for some of the time that they're not commuting on their primary job. So, for example, I was talking to an IT worker at one of the companies that I helped transition, and he was telling me that, so he's a hybrid worker. And so he comes into work on some days and he doesn't come into work on other days. He works remotely. On the days that he comes into work, I mean, he's a pretty hard worker. So he comes, his official day is 9 to 5. He comes in by 8:30ish, and he's not like coming in at 9. He's coming in at 8:30, and he definitely is working hard at 9. And then when he's leaving, he doesn't kind of finish up at 4:30 and then pack up and leave at 5. He works until usually past 5 and then leaves by 5:30. That's his typical in-office day. What about his remote day? Well, remotely, he doesn't have to take the time to commute to work. So on his in-office day, he wakes up at something like 6:30, I think, and then starts getting ready for work at 7:30, and then arrives at work at 8:30, and so on, back the other way. Now, in his other days, he wakes up at something like, it's the same schedule, at 6:30, just because that's what he's used to. And then by 8 o'clock, he's already actually working. So he already got through his morning routine, got breakfast, whatever. By 8 o'clock, he's working. And then he clocks off at 5 o'clock. And then he spends a little bit of time with his family. And then he does some emails from after spending time with his kids from like 9 to 9:30 or something like that. So quite a bit more work per day that this person is working remotely, rather than the time this person is working in the office. And again, this is a hybrid worker who works some days in the office and some days remotely. There was a randomized control trial about this topic. And the randomized control trial took place in Trip.com, which is one of the largest travel agencies in the world. And it assigned some software engineers and other background, other people like marketing, HR, auditing. It assigned half of them to work traditional 9-to-5 office-centric days, and half of them to work to a hybrid schedule. So coming into work sometimes and not coming into work, and working remotely at other times. It found that people who worked remotely, so part of the time, so those in a hybrid schedule, that half of the company's workforce had 35% better retention. So it's huge. And they were quite a bit more productive. In fact, engineers specifically, for which we have very hard data, they wrote 8% more code. So you, as IT professionals, those of you who are IT professionals, understand the importance of that. So they wrote 8% more good code, which is a very clear and hard metric of productivity. There was a Stanford University study which showed that we are getting better at remote work over time. In May 2020, remote workers were about 5% more productive than in-office ones. And for the commute reasons and so on. There are other reasons why people are more productive. It's not only commuting. Another reason that people are more productive is that they have more flexibility. So they don't have to take time off work to go deal with their kids if their kids have an issue, or if they have, if they need to deal with a plumber coming to their house, they don't need to take the time off work to do that. And they can do that in between working, and they can have more flexible hours. They can work before the official scheduled clock and after the official scheduled time, which is quite beneficial for many people who are either morning doves or night owls. So those people who are morning doves like to start their workday, they like to wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m. and they like to start their workday at 6 to 7 a.m. And those who are night owls like to wake up at like 10 or some 11 and start their workday by maybe 12 or something like that, and then work until 9. So those are the kinds of people for whom this additional flexibility helps them be more productive, more efficient. And so that's the reason for the 5% increase in productivity in May 2020. But 2 years later, by May 2022, people who were working remotely were 9% more productive. Now, why is that? Well, because people got better at working remotely. People became more effective, more productive. We learned what it's like to work more effectively in a remote setting. So that was a really important development, where people learned how to work more effectively remotely, how to collaborate more effectively. Then, of course, there was also more investment into the infrastructure of working remotely. That includes hardware, home office setup, the backend enterprise setup, and systems and processes became more efficient and effective. So that was all quite important. Working from home also clearly improves well-being. So we have extensive studies that well-being is going to be quite a bit better if people are working from home. Mostly or fully remote work would make people, 75% of the people happier, over 70% feel less stressed, over 75% better able to manage work-life balance. And so we can clearly see that this really improves well-being in many ways to have substantial amount of remote work, mostly or fully. Now, there are some challenges with remote work. Over 50% report feeling overworked. Over 55% experienced burnout, more for young adults, which is important to emphasize that people who are going into the office experience burnout at a higher rate. So people who are fully office-centric and who do jobs that are remote capable, like IT professionals, auditing professionals, and so on, they report higher levels of burnout than people who are working remotely. Over 80% want fewer meetings. The biggest issues that people complain about is a lack of effective communication skills and technology issues. So those are the biggest issues that people tend to complain about in terms of remote work. Now, given that, I'm going to ask you to think about your own working style. So thinking about all these numbers, thinking about your own preferences, and thinking about all this information, what would be your own preferred working style going forward? Please go ahead and vote. See about 4/5 of us participated. Let's give 5 more seconds for those who haven't made their voice heard. Okay, so we see that there's a little bit more than average amount of people who want to work fully remote, which aligns with the fact that people in tech professions, IT, tend to want to work remotely more than average people, than the average remote worker, let's say in finance or something. Then we have that 10% 1 day in the office, and that's something like 25% are going to be 2 days in the office. So altogether, we'll have something like 3/4 of the people want to work less than 3 days in the office. So we have very clear numbers that very strong preference for working mostly at home. And then the other numbers are going to be accordant. Okay. Good. Now, I talked about some of the cognitive biases, some of the errors that we make when we think about remote and hybrid work. So I'd like to get into these errors and what they are, just so we understand them. These are cognitive biases, decision-making cognitive biases. Now, cognitive biases, you might have heard this term before. Cognitive bias refers to a dangerous judgment error that we make because of how our mind is wired. The key thing to understand is that our mind, as it is right now, is not really wired for the modern environment. It's wired for the Savannah environment. I mean, us interacting right now, right? Having a hybrid meeting. That's not what we're wired for. That's not what we're used to. That's not how we are used to interacting and engaging with each other. So that's not something that our mind is wired for. Our mind is wired for the ancient Savannah environment. When we lived in small tribes of 50 people to 150 people, we had to respond with a fight or flight reflex. It was beneficial for us to jump at 100 shadows to avoid that one saber-toothed tiger. And in the modern world, we still react way too quickly to stimuli that we should not be reacting so quickly to, and we still tend to be way too tribal for our own good. So that's the tribalism. And there are many, many other aspects of these errors coming from our evolutionary background and the structure of our brain that cause us to make mistakes when we view the future of work. So let's talk about these decision-making cognitive biases in the future of work. Status quo bias is a huge one. It's a huge problem. It's a desire to maintain or get back to the status quo, which is kind of understandable from a savanna perspective. If you were in that savanna environment, it was going to be very important for you to not change the situation. If the situation changed in that very precarious environment, it was likely an indication that things were going worse, not better. So it was important to get back to the previous state of affairs. So it's understandable why we have a desire to maintain or get back to the status quo. But that results in the modern environment in bad problems, because in the modern environment, changes that we experience are actually shifting our environment, not necessarily and changing the way that we engage with the world, whether it's the rise of the internet or the rise of smartphones or the 2008-2009 fiscal crisis or the pandemic or the rise of hybrid and remote work. These all changed our environment. So we need to look forward, not look back. We need to adapt to the new environment. And it's very hard for our intuitions to do so. It's especially hard for leaders. So we need to empathize with them. We need to understand where they're coming from. A lot of leaders have trouble adjusting to the new situation. They feel that the previous status quo was the right way to be. And it's understandable why, because they feel successful in that environment. They succeeded in that environment for 20, 30, 40 years. That's why they're leaders, right? They are in that, they've been successful at it. And many of them don't know how to lead in this new environment of remote work and hybrid work. I help leaders every day. I talk to them and they tell me that, look, I really don't feel comfortable in this new environment of remote work and hybrid work. I just want to go back to where I'm comfortable and how I know to succeed. That's why you'll see people like Elon Musk calling everyone back to the office, because that's how they know how to succeed, rather than it being the most effective way to work. So that's the status quo bias. Another problematic cognitive bias is called the confirmation bias. The confirmation bias. If you have cognitive biases, this is probably the cognitive bias you've heard about. It has to do with the fact that our minds look for information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and then ignores information that doesn't. If you think back to that savanna environment, it was important for us to make snap judgments. Again, it was better for us to jump at 100 shadows rather than to miss one saber-toothed tiger. So we needed to confirm and react quickly to our initial impressions and make snap judgments. In the modern world, we have many, many less saber-toothed tigers. It's much more important for us to make a nuanced and complex evaluation of the situation, but we don't tend to do so. So we align our intuitions are to align our pre-existing beliefs with the new information. Like that office-centric work is best. And you see a lot of leaders doing this who are experienced and who know how to succeed in that environment. And finally, a really big cognitive bias here is called functional fixedness. Functional fixedness. It's like the hammer-nail syndrome. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when you have one way of functioning in that hybrid, in that office-centric environment, you know how to function in that environment. You know how to collaborate. You know how to innovate. You know how to hold people accountable. You know how to mentor people. You know how to onboard junior team members. Then you tend to apply that dynamic to all other contexts. You tend to shoehorn those methods of collaboration, innovation, leadership, management, mentoring into hybrid and remote work. And that just does not work very well. So this is a big problem called functional fixedness. We perceive one way of functioning, we shoehorn office culture into hybrid and remote work, and we fail to adapt strategically to working in our new reality. Now, thinking about these three cognitive biases, which of these do you think might be the biggest problem in your workplace? Please go ahead and vote. Okay. Good. So we see everyone voted. That's great. So by far, status quo bias is the overwhelming winner. So this is definitely pretty clear for the answers that this is the overwhelming winner. So please take that information to your team, your leaders. First of all, think about how it impacts your workplace, and then take it to your team, to your leaders, to help address whichever one of these you perceive to be the biggest problem. Okay, I'll stop now and take questions on the first part of the presentation, which is going to be everything about the data and the free cognitive biases. After we do the question and answer, we'll break up into groups, to breakout groups to discuss a question based on the presentation so far. But I'll be happy to take any questions. You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, whichever is more convenient for you. And if there are any questions in the conference room, I'm sure that you can unmute that and questions can be asked.
Curious, can you hear us or not?
No, unmuted.
Oh, I'm not unmuted. Okay.
Okay,
So
now it's unmuted.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I'm curious if you've presented to leadership, maybe at the executive level, the statistics that you've presented so far, and
Yep.
what are the general reactions you get to that?
Well, so, I mean, obviously depends on the leadership team. So like I said, I helped 21 companies transition. And it depends on the individual leader's opinion. So there are always, what I tend to, almost always, there'll be some people in the room who are more traditionalist leaders and who say that, well, regardless of these statistics, I really feel much more comfortable leading in person. And therefore, I want people to come to the office. And other people who are fully supportive of remote work and flexibility and would be fully supportive without these statistics. The statistics really are helpful for those who are more in the middle and who are not sure about how to proceed forward. And those statistics are helpful for them to recognize that, hey, maybe we don't want a fully office-centric company. Maybe we want to be at least hybrid, maybe allow some people to be fully remote. So presenting these statistics tends to move those people who are movable to be more flexible about how they think about the future, the strategic future of permanent post-work arrangements for their company. And that, when I do these when I do presentations, internal ones to the leadership team of a company, I also usually do a survey of the company beforehand. So I give them the external data, and then I give them internal data. And so that also has a certain impact, often a stronger impact than external data.
Thank you.
Sure. Five more seconds for any questions in the chat or unmute yourself. Great. Okay. So what I'll be doing is I will create a number of breakout rooms, and the people who are in the room, you should break out into groups of about 3 people to discuss things. And I will, for the people who are dialing in, I know a number of people are dialing in from the room itself. So I'll create only 2 breakout, I'll create, yeah, 5 breakout rooms here. And so some of the people, hopefully the people who are not dialing in and who from the room will be in a room with others who are, actually, let me do this. I'll let participants choose the room. So that I think might be easier. So if you're dialing in, meaning if you're not in the beach conference room, please go to room 5. And so go ahead to room 5. Everyone who is in the beach conference room, please break up into groups of 3 to 4. The question I want you to discuss is, given the data, given this information, how has the cognitive biases, how have you observed these 3 cognitive biases impact the approach to hybrid and remote work in your workplace? So please discuss that. How have you seen any of these 3 cognitive biases? Talk about all 3, or talk about 1, or talk about 2, whichever seems most relevant for you. So share about what's going on. Each person should share about what's going on in their workplace related to these cognitive biases. What have you observed? And then think about how, once given that you've observed this information, and you've gotten this information from the presentation, how can you bring it back to your teams effectively and enable them to to address these cognitive biases? So that is going to be the prompt. Are there any questions about the prompt? So any questions about the prompt? So again, first discuss the 3 cognitive biases, how they impact you, break up into groups of 3 to 4. And then after you do that, discuss how you can bring this information and to the organization more broadly and address the problems from these cognitive biases. Okay, great, no questions there. What we'll do is we'll have a 15-minute discussion. So I'll set 15 minutes, and then everyone who is in the breakout room who is dialing in should join room 5. If anyone who's dialing in has a problem, let me know if you have a technical issue. So Tammy, you should be able to see on your screen joining rooms, and there should be one room that's room 5, and you should be able to join it. But I can also Tammy too. I can also assign you to room 5 automatically, so you should be able to join it now. So you should be able to click on join and join it. Great. And if anyone has any technical issues, let me know. Okay, Chris, I'll move you to 5. So again, if someone wants me to help them, move them to a certain room, please go ahead. No problem, Brian. I'll move you to room 5 in the meantime, and then you can choose what to do about that. Okay, seems everyone is doing well. Then I will step back in a couple of minutes before that. About 30 more seconds, everyone, 30 more seconds. Okay, everyone, good. Let's get out of our groups. So finish up discussions. Okay, I'd like some folks to share about insights that they had as a result of these discussions, both about how the cognitive biases impact their companies, organizations, if it's not a company, and then what steps you'll take to address these, how to bring this information to your leadership teams, and what steps you'll take to address these cognitive biases. Please go ahead. You can put in the chat or you can unmute yourself. If you're in the large room, you can also chat. And if you're in the large room and somebody wants to share, please unmute people in the large room. Devan, did you have something to share? Yes, go ahead, Devan.
Yeah, we had, I think, quite an interesting discussion where we kind of came to the conclusion that ultimately all three of these biases are on a foundational level saying the same thing.
Tell me more.
So we were discussing how we had, a pretty typical hybrid schedule. And then we had somebody, I think it was Brent, whose company actually surveyed the employees to see what they would prefer in terms of working. And from a recruiting standpoint, that's one of the first questions that they get asked is, what's the working environment like? And so, I mean, if you take a look at the status quo bias and the desire to maintain or get back to the status quo, and then you look at functional fixedness and perceiving there's only one right way to function, those things they seem very interrelated. And then you add a level with the confirmation bias where our minds are looking for information that confirms those pre-existing beliefs, which relates back to, the status quo bias and the functional fixedness.
Yes, all of these cognitive biases are getting at different aspects of a way that we make mistakes around hybrid and remote work. So the status quo bias has to do with trying to get back to January 2020 and earlier. Functional fixedness has to do with how we do work in hybrid settings and remote settings, that we apply office-based culture to it. And confirmation bias, of course, is looking for evidence that confirms our beliefs. So yes, they are all feeding into each other, which is why I talked about all three of them. And I'm glad that you noticed that, Devan, and that you had a good group discussion about that. Excellent. Other folks who want to share about their perspectives? How about someone from the conference room? Mhm.
I was gonna say, we didn't have a lot of biases. We've been remote working for about 12 years.
Excellent.
But what you had was people getting used to not going into an office and being excited about not going in anymore. And then your clients are much happier because you're not there as much anymore. So it was pretty much a win.
Excellent.
But it was something that happened in our HR. It was a pilot for probably 6 months, and then it was just 2 days a week, and then went full bore from that point on. So it's been good for employee morale, been good for maintaining employees. There's been a lot of positives that have come out of it, but it does create some of the social aspects where you're not really talking to each other one-on-one as you used to. But that flexibility, I think, outweighs the one-to-one communication. So,
Yep. We'll talk about some ways to improve collaboration and social bonding in the next part of the presentation, but that's great. Other people in the conference room, so who did not have a situation that's remote work, that was remote working even before the pandemic.
I could just say that I had a situation where we were like twice a week remote, and then we were full remote through the pandemic. And as quickly as possible, due to most of these biases combined, they wanted us back into the office. And I now have a new job. So all of my discussions and logic did not work. So maybe I needed to see this before that.
I mean, this is why we're talking about bringing this information back, because many companies are in the situation that they're trying to decide how to bring employees back, and they're not realizing that they're falling into these mistakes. So, yep. Anyone else wants to share that one has certain insights that they think others would be helped by, like the folks did so far?
Yeah, hi, this is Anthony Wilson. I think there's one interesting aspect from all of this is the ability for people to work in remote locations from their home. I know in our own department, we've had a number of people that have left for fully remote positions, and these are positions that pay very nice salaries. Because they're positions that for firms and companies in larger cities. I know we had one girl leave and works now for a company in Seattle. We had someone else leave for a company in Houston. So they are able to do this job remotely, fully, which works for their schedule and their lifestyle. And that's just a totally different type of a workforce challenge, so to speak, that has come from post-COVID, the post-COVID world that we live in. So that's just very interesting. And one thing I'm curious is when are the salaries, I guess, going to readjust themselves for situations like this, where we have, where you're able to take advantage of cost of living advantages as far as where you may live now, but take advantages of the salary opportunities that exist for the larger companies in the bigger cities. Yeah.
So for clients I work with, it is typically the case that remote workers, what tends to happen is that remote workers get paid less through having raises that are lower. So we're not lowering their salaries, but there's cost of living adjustments, right? So salaries have cost of living adjustments in many cases. So if it's a large company, usually you have a COLA. So it's a cost of living adjustment to your salary. So you will have somewhat lower salary if you live in Northwestern Ohio than if you live in San Francisco and you work for the same company. That's one. Second, we do see that companies are giving raises at a small raises to people who work remotely, because of course that people who work remotely, that is a perception of a benefit, and they're willing to take lower raises in exchange for working remotely. So that's, yeah, so that's something that one point I want to make. The second point I want to make, and I'll talk about this more in the next part of the presentation, is that there are a number of people who are not, something like 35% of the people, 25 to 35, depending on the survey, are interested in working full-time remotely. Something like maybe 2/3, and this is all remote capable people. Something like 2/3 of those who are remote capable don't want to work full-time remotely because they still want that occasional in-person contact. Now, some of those people are going to be fine coming in. You know, I have one client, I have people in one client who work something like 3 days, no, I'm sorry, 3 days a month from home and then come for a week, work in the main office. So they're fine working remotely, but they do want that in-person contact occasionally. And there's definitely benefits to in-person contact. Again, not for everyone. It depends on personality, depends on your ability to work, and also to what extent you're collaborating more or less with other people. Devon, I saw you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, I was gonna play devil's advocate kind of to the last comment that we had, because I actually make a significant higher salary working fully remote than I did when I was in the office.
Yep.
So
Yep, definitely, absolutely, and it definitely happens. Like I said, if you find a company that works, usually it happens because if you live in Northwestern Ohio and you find a company that's in San Francisco or New York, you will still tend to get quite a bit higher, even if there's a cost of living adjustment compared to your colleagues in Northwestern Ohio.
yeah.
Now, Matthew asks, he's all for remote working, but what's the risk that companies will use the success of remote jobs to simply outsource jobs offshore? So this is definitely something that I've been looking at. And what I tend to see is that companies have a lot of concerns about outsourcing jobs from the perspective of compliance, labor laws, taxes, regulations, and also just time zone differences. You know, it's pretty hard to work with somebody who is in India if you need to communicate with them, for example, or somebody who's in Nigeria if you are in the US time zone. So, and that's kind of one. So one is the HR, compliance, labor laws, tax laws. Another is time zone differences. And a third is culture. There's definitely cultural aspects of working, of being part of the US labor force that you have to really adjust to someone who is working from outside the US. So that's kind of and it's both in terms of not simply language and so on, but background culture, but also just your work culture, your approach to professional work. So all of these sorts of things. So what I'm seeing is that it's only realistically a significant issue for really large companies which have the resources to overcome these challenges of, again, labor laws, compliance, regulations, issues, which have the challenges of overcoming time zone differences, the challenges of overcoming the people who have different working styles, and the challenges of overcoming different cultures. So I wouldn't be too worried about it for regional companies that are based in Northwestern Ohio. But if, you know, some large companies, if you work for a large company like an Intel or something that has a branch in Northwestern Ohio, something like that, or Honda, that might be something to worry about.
I think you're also going to see an increase in both legal and insurance issues. This is something that I've been hearing about organizations are dealing with. From a remote perspective, people are working longer hours, and it starts to blur the line between being on company time and being on personal time. Particularly if you happen to have an incident at your house, a slip and fall, things of that nature, but it's on company time. Does that come under something that you got hurt on the job working? Or is that something that because it was in your own environment, that you got hurt in your house and it's on you? So when you start coming down to things like workman's compensation and things like that, it's really blurring the line between the organization and the individual. So that's something that I've been hearing a bit about, and a lot of HR groups, insurance groups, and legal entities are still struggling with dealing with that right now.
There's definitely, it's a question of concern. What I've been seeing is if it's not a work-related incident, then if it's not like you get carpal tunnel syndrome while typing, it's not too much of an issue, because if you slip and fall, you're not falling in the company's building, you're falling in your own building. And so that has not been too much of a problem for the clients I've worked with. The only thing that is a significant concern is issues around ergonomics and injuries from repeated work stress on the home computer. Much more concerning is cybersecurity. I mean, that's kind of an obvious one, but that has been the major concern from people working at home. And what I've been working with my clients is to make sure to provide their employees with adequate hardened computers, software, VPN, all that that they can use at home. But the insurance issues, labor laws issues have not been so much of a problem, especially in terms of, there's been some issues with hourly workers, but it hasn't been too much of a problem, because if people are working longer, they're not required to work longer, they're not expected to work longer. So I have not seen those be too much of a challenge so far, again, except with the exception of the issues that I've named. We'll see how things develop.
I wanted to raise an issue about equity. I know I work for the University of Toledo, and we do have a remote work policy, but it's dependent, approval is dependent on a vice president of a particular area. And so not every employee has the opportunity to work remotely. So there are equity issues. And the other thing is, we do have seen some senior leaders who work remotely. And, I'm a little concerned about it because, we're all, higher education, across the country is suffering from enrollment declines. And, wonder if people aren't living in the area, how long would they be committed, to the university? It's senior leaders who can make the necessary changes that we need in these times. And so there's concerns there that we won't be able to accomplish our goals if we have too many people at the top who aren't invested in the community.
So I'm quite familiar with the academic world in this. One of my clients is the University of Southern California, so that large university. So I'm quite familiar with what's going on. And it's a matter, for the senior leadership, it's a matter of a trade-off. Because if you don't allow senior leaders who want to work remotely, honestly, they're marketable enough to go work somewhere else. So it's a matter of a trade-off, whether you want to retain candidates who are excellent, or whether you're willing to accept candidates who are less excellent, who are going to be willing to stay in the local area. And I'm not saying either choice is better or worse, but it's a realistic choice. We need to accept that candidates who want to work remotely and are marketable, they are going to be more excellent than the candidates that you can get who are going to be willing to not work remotely and stay in the local area. So and each place has to make its own choice. The University of Southern California has made the choice of giving more flexibility and not having as much of a stringent requirement of working remotely, but that's their choice. It might be different for the University of Toledo. So not judging. My goal as a consultant is to present the information in either way and talk about the trade-offs. So that's one thing to think about. The other, so going back to the question about equity, you definitely want to have a situation that's perceived as fair. And we'll be talking about that in the second part of the presentation. It's really important that there's a perception of fairness so that the decisions on who gets to work remotely aren't made arbitrarily. There's clear policies and procedures, and you could say, okay, certain roles and certain positions are going to be able to work remotely because of reasons X, Y, and Z that are spelled out in our remote work policy. And other positions are not going to be able to work remotely because of this, and or other policies, other people, like for example, at the University of Southern California, we figured out a system for admins to work remotely, where admins can work remotely, were allowed to work remotely 3 days a week, and they would cover the admin related needs in the office 2 days a week. So that was enough to cover the admin related need, especially because many less faculty and grad students were coming to the office staff because it's much more of a hybrid environment. And so they were less needed in the office, and they were more needed to do things like scheduling. I mean, I was surprised when I actually started working for the university, consulting for the university, how much of admin time was spent on scheduling. Whoa. And that can very easily be done from home. So these sorts of things need to be figured out in a decision matrix where you can talk about different roles and how different roles, based on their functionality and based on their ability to accomplish their goals, can work more remotely or less remotely. I hope that helps. So Brent asks in the question that many companies are requiring employees to be in person 1 to 5 days a week. How many companies are tracking and enforcing that? What we're seeing is that companies are having a different approach to compliance issues. I was just working with one of my clients, which is they allowed me to talk about their work. This is applied, and the same thing about the University of Southern California. They allowed me to talk about their work. They gave me a testimonial. Applied Materials, which is a Fortune 200 high-tech manufacturing company. And they are a global company. And so they've been trying to figure out what they're going to do about employees who are resistant, who are coming, they have a policy of having 3 days in the office. And some people are coming into the office 1 day a week. Some people are coming into the office 2 days. I mean, most people are coming in 3 days, but some people are coming in 1 day. Some people are coming in 2 days. Some people are coming in 3 days, but maybe staying in the office for like 2-3 hours. And so there's been kind of an approach of kind of graduated management of that. So first of all, talking to the people, then having a reprimand, kind of a write-up, and it goes all the way to lowering someone's salary, so having salary reductions. We have decided not to fire people for that, that it's not worthwhile to fire people for it. So the effective consequence is that it's a slowdown of your career and a decrease in salary if you don't comply after a number of warnings, but it's not going to result in the firing in that specific company. In most companies that I've seen, when we look at surveys, at external data, at benchmarks, they don't tend to fire people. I mean, you hear about companies like Tesla or now Twitter, where Elon Musk has, that little bit of a messiah complex where it's like, okay, you do what I say or I will fire you. That attitude, imperialistic attitude. But that is not the case for the large majority of companies, where I think maybe something like maybe a third of companies are willing to go all the way to firing people. Most companies are not. Other questions? Good discussion.
Have you seen any effects as far as employee retention, with employees being happier and stuff, being able to work on the online environment? Are we seeing more people? Obviously, it hasn't been for long, but does it seem like more people are willing to stay longer at companies, or are people job hopping more due to the opportunities to work kind of at a wider range of places now?
We definitely see that the more people are given an opportunity to work remotely, if they're remote capable, the longer they tend to be retained. There's no question. It's a very strong correlation. I think I mentioned we have peer-reviewed studies on this, that were actually randomized control trials where half of the people were given full in-office schedule, other people were given a hybrid schedule. And there was a 35% better retention among the people who were given at least some time remote. So yeah, we definitely see that the more flexibility you give people, flexibility in terms of place to work and schedule flexibility as well, the more likely you are to retain them. Absolutely.
With more companies entering into that environment, do you see any change happening with that potential?
What I'm seeing is that companies are right now, more companies are asking employees to come back. And so the companies that are asking employees to come back are losing people. So, it's pretty typical for a company to say, come back 2 days a week, come back 3 days a week. And those companies are definitely seeing employees lose people, are seeing losing people to companies that are offering more flexibility, more remote work. You especially see losses in underrepresented groups, meaning groups like African Americans, Hispanics, women. When you talk about tech, women are underrepresented. So you see group in women, working parents, people with disabilities. Those all tend to be groups that want to work more time remotely. So for different reasons. For example, African Americans, they still report that they experience microaggressions and discrimination when they come to the office. And especially they've had a lot of relief over that time since the start of the pandemic. Now they're being asked to come into the office and they're re-experiencing that all over again. They are very much not interested in that experience, many of them. And so they are much more willing to look for a new job. That's African Americans, Hispanics. Then you have for women, they still do much more of the caretaker roles. And so they need to, caring over children, for elders, household chores. So they tend to have more of a desire for working from home for that reason. And so that's women. Working parents, that's both for both men and women for obvious reasons, more of a desire to work from home. People with disabilities are an interesting situation. You had a situation where for both people with disabilities and without disabilities, you had a huge drop in employment at the start of the pandemic, naturally. And then you had the recovery in employment, where for people without disabilities, the current employment rate for people without disabilities is 1.1% lower than it was before the start of the pandemic. So we still haven't fully recovered. There are still some people out of the workforce who don't have disabilities, but the large majority of the people who have left the workforce have come back. For people with disabilities, the employment rate is 3.5% higher than it was before the pandemic. So higher than it was before the pandemic. And that's all due to remote work. We can very clearly see that people with disabilities are much more able to work because of remote work. And I'm talking both obvious disabilities like physical mobility disabilities, but also things like, let's say, autism spectrum disorder, who have trouble with interactions in person, but do much better when the interactions are over text and asynchronous, so not synchronous interactions. Also, COVID, of course, long COVID has been a real blow to the workforce. It's caused something like 3.5 million people to reduce their work hours. So it's a huge blow. It's in the trillions, according to economic estimates. And the last numbers I've seen has been that around 1.7 million people have been disabled since the start of the pandemic. And the large majority of that is due to long COVID. So conditions like fatigue and brain fog. Of that number, 800,000 completely left the workforce, but 900,000 are still working, which is quite a bit more than would have been working without remote work. And so invisible disabilities like brain fatigue, like brain fog and fatigue are not something that's visible, but it's definitely something that is a very serious problem for people. And remote work allows people to work because, again, fatigue and brain fog inhibit people from being able to synchronously collaborate, go to the office, and so on. So remote work has been very helpful for them. Also, remote work in terms of people with disabilities is, depending on a disability, very much something that the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, covers as something that employers should be providing for people with disabilities who have fatigue, brain fog, physical mobility disabilities, various autism spectrum disorders, and so on, as an accommodation. So that's been another important area of what's going on in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion for remote work.
I have a quick question that kind of builds off what Corey initially asked. So as people are leaving and going to more remote jobs for either more money or this or that, and this might be a premature question because I don't know if we're able to measure it yet, but are companies shifting to take a look at their current employees and see how they can value those employees versus leaving? Like, I mean, we were discussing how many people can go find a counter offer or another job, and then the current employer tends to counter offer that whatever that counter salary was, and their job and role doesn't change at all, but they get a 10 to 15, 20 grand pay increase for no change. Are companies recognizing that and doing anything to be like, oh crap, we should pay attention to our people that are actually loyal to us? Or are we just going to continue to see this? The only way to be valued is to leave and come back or to find external job offers?
So there's two things I want to say about that. One is we need to understand what are the incentives for company salaries. So there's companies have recruiters. So the HR department has recruiters. Their incentive is to bring in new people. The HR department doesn't have retainers. That is not a job that is part of the HR department. They don't get brownie points for retaining people. They get brownie points if their job is to recruit new people. The recruiting new people is visible and clear. Retaining people is invisible and not clear. So companies have much fewer incentives to retain people than they have to recruit people, just because of the structure of the company that is quite problematic, to be honest, that the companies are structured this way. And I strongly encourage companies to change things when I work with them, and I'll talk about that second. But realistically, the answer is going to be for the vast majority of companies that don't recognize this dysfunctional dynamic in salaries and HR departments. The vast majority of the situations, yeah, you absolutely want to go out there and get an offer and come back to your company and see if they'll make a counter offer, because that's realistically the only way. Playing that game is realistically the only way that in the vast majority of cases, you will get the kind of salary that you deserve. So, and again, that's not because the company is bad or evil or dumb. It's because of the structure, inherent structure and incentives of the company and its HR department, which that's the way it is. Now, when I work with companies, what I strongly encourage them to do is when we're transitioning to permanent future of work arrangements, figuring out hybrid work and remote work, if they do want people to come to the office, then I very strongly encourage them to specifically fund people to come to the office, to pay their commuting costs, to pay them for things like dry cleaning, to pay them for things like childcare, if childcare is needed, to pay them for things like office lunch and so on. So paying various commuting costs that are associated with coming to the office, and that's one. And second, paying if they do have people who are working full-time remotely or part-time remotely, meaning a hybrid schedule, then paying those people to set up a home office. That's because the companies work, if you have a hybrid schedule of, let's say, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, you still have 40% of your company work done at home, and you really need people to be efficient and comfortable and have good ergonomics, as we mentioned before. So to be functioning well, so to be maximally productive at home as well as in the office. You want to fund that home office. So those are things that I work with companies to do to help in the transition and effectively increase the salaries of people who are coming to the office. Hope that helps. Other questions? Okay, good. Good discussion. Let's take a 10-minute break. It's 2:55. Please be back at 3:55. I'm sorry, at 3:05. We'll restart in 2 minutes. Okay, hope everyone is back and ready. Let's see. In the conference room, can you confirm everything is ready? Just unmute and confirm whether you're ready or not. Okay, so sounds like the conference room is ready. Good. All right, let's go on. So let's talk about what are the actual best practices for hybrid and remote work. This is the second part of the presentation. So best practices for hybrid and remote work for most companies. This is for 20 of the companies that I've worked with, we've adopted this model. One company adopted a home-centric model, but 20 companies adopted a hybrid-first team-led model. So the best approach is not, unlike Apple, unlike many other companies, to have the CEO decide on like, you're going to be here Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or something like that. The best approach, very clearly, is to have the team lead at the lowest possible level decide what works best for their team. So again, team leads deciding what works best for their team within broad guidelines. So for example, you can give broad guidelines on these certain types of positions and certain departments probably want to spend a little bit more time in the office or less time in the office or whatever. So for example, I've seen sales departments generally spend more time in the office because there's mutual motivation, engagement that you would want to get when you're doing outbound sales calls, which are a hard thing to do. And so it's motivating and engaging, and you learn from other people who are making sales calls right by you. So for those sorts of roles, there's encouragement to spend more time in the office. For others, like let's say software programming, where there's much more individual focused time required, and very clearly see that individual focused time is, for the vast majority of people, much better than at home. People are much more productive on their focused time at home. And so it depends on the nature of your role, But overall, it's up to the team lead in consultation with the team. This is not just, your boss saying, this is the thing that you should do. The team lead in consultation with the team and each individual member decide what works best for their team. The breakdown is that the large majority of people are going to be hybrid. Generally, that's what I see. And again, that includes some people who are required to be in the office due to the nature of their profession. So for example, for applied materials, that would be people who are on the shop factory floor for the high-tech manufacturing company. So it depends on the company. So 90%, that has closer to 90% of the people hybrid, including something like about, I don't remember how many, maybe 50, 60% of the staff who have to be there full time just because it's the nature of their job. And then like 40% are hybrid, and then the rest are fully remote. But in companies like software as a service company, you're going to have closer to the 60% mark or 50% mark are going to be coming into the office maybe 1 day a week, or maybe once every 2 weeks. Fully remote employees are going to be the minority, but a large minority, from 10 to 40%. So again, it depends on your role. And you want to adopt best practices for hybrid and remote work arrangements when you do so. So this is a hybrid first team-led model where team lead in consultation with their team decides on what works best, because the team lead knows what's most needed for their team. They know what the team needs. They have the knowledge, they have the expertise, not the CEO at the top has the knowledge and expertise. It's the team lead who has the knowledge and expertise in consultation with the rest of the team to do that. And we've seen very clear surveys that show that in the situation where it's a team-based model, where the team decides what happens for the team, then you have much more employee engagement. So very, very clearly, you have much higher employee engagement when the team decides versus just having the CEO decide. Now, before the team leads make the decision on hybrid and remote work arrangements, you want to give them some training. You want to help them understand what's going to be best. So train them on what are the cognitive biases: status quo bias, confirmation bias, functional fixedness. We talked about those three, and best practices, which we'll talk about next. Now, when you think about the amount of hybrid work and in-office work, it should really be based on collaboration, because the thing that you go into the office for is not your focused work. For the large majority, I mean, there are going to be some individuals who have a lot of difficulty in their home office working on focused tasks, but that's going to be a small minority. We see maybe 15% of the people who really need to be in the office to do focused work. The large majority of people prefer and are better and more productive at focused work in their home. So their individual tasks, which require focus and attention, are better done at home. Collaborative tasks are more of a wash. We see different surveys and different kinds of tasks having different results. So for the more intense collaboration, it's generally better to be in the office where you need to engage with people more intensely. And so that you might say for the office. And so thinking about that, a default of 1 day a week is going to be more than enough for the large majority of people, because most people's collaborative tasks are less than 20% of their work. The large majority of their tasks are going to be individual tasks, and especially the more intense collaborative tasks that need to be in the office. So default is good enough for team cohesion and collaboration. So again, team cohesion is also quite important. Building up trust, very valuable. And having team leads, if team leads want to spend more than 1 day in the office, what we do in the companies that I help transition is we have a justification process. So they have to justify to HR why they have to do that. So the team leads who are just very kind of old style and traditional don't just say, well, I'm traditional and I want people in the office just because I feel like it. So this is a team-led model. Now, I'd like to take any questions that people have on the team-led model, but let me do this part first. So for who should get fully remote options, and so that I can take all the questions all together. For fully remote options, of course, teams whose leaders choose to go fully remote. So if you have a fully remote company, we talked about one of the companies that has worked there for one of the people who worked there for 12 years for a fully remote company. Great. And then for individuals in hybrid teams, so the other people on the team are coming into the office. If the people really want to stay remote, want to be remote, and they're productive, so they're able to show that they're meeting their numbers well, maybe even better, disciplined, they show discipline in all sorts of areas, meeting deadlines and so on. They're self-starters, they show initiative. So they go and they solve problems in advance. They don't just have the manager worry about where they are. They communicate with the manager and tell their manager what they're doing, what's going on with them. So there's an open, clear line of communication. So they're productive, they're disciplined self-starters when working remotely. And we need to be aware that people who are working remotely, if the rest of their team is working in the office, you have to work harder to have career growth. You have to be more effective of a self-advocate. So you have to be told that, and you have to understand that if the rest of the team is coming to the office and you're working remotely, you have to look out for yourself more. You have to be more of a self-advocate to have the appropriate level of career growth. And considerations for junior staff, people who are not very well experienced. They may underestimate career issues, especially because if you're just out of college or new to a company and you haven't built up the network and you haven't built up the knowledge of people, it might be better to spend more time in the office. So coming in, even if you have the option of being fully remote, coming in more often in order to build up a network, in order to figure out the etiquette, the norms of how things are done. So that's when you look at the research, there's definitely some benefits for junior staff to spend more time in the office, especially being mentored by more senior staff. Very importantly is for including people who are fully remote to have team building retreats. I strongly recommend once a quarter, but at least once every 6 months. That is important to build trust, social bonds, and plan team strategy and how you're going to collaborate effectively. So I'll take questions on the team-led model, on training managers, and on fully remote options. But before we take questions on it, let me ask you, how valuable do you think it would be for your workplace to adopt this team-led model? So please go ahead and vote in the poll. See, over 3/4 of you voted. Let's give 5 more seconds for those who haven't made their voice heard. Okay, so we see just about half would find it highly valuable. That's excellent. So you can go back to your teams and strongly encourage them to adopt your companies, bring this information, encourage them to adopt this model. Find not valuable, no problem. If find moderately valuable, consider what components of the team-led model you can apply. Okay, so at this point, I'll take questions on the team-led model, on the 3 components of it that I described so far. So again, you can chat or you can unmute yourself, put it in the chat. You can also mute yourself if you want. I know the conference room has been unmuted. So if anyone has any questions in the conference room, please just speak up. Five more seconds before we go on. Okay, let's go on. So how do we solve issues around building social capital and collaboration in remote and hybrid teams? We already talked about that as an issue, that, hey, the company that has worked 12 years remotely have some challenges with collaboration, connection. We see, when we look at remote work, we see that this is the major challenge. Collaboration and a sense of connection to company culture, connection to people from outside your team. We don't see an issue with connections from people within your team. In fact, connections with people from within your team tend to actually become stronger. Of not necessarily, well, connections, not necessarily trust, but connections with people from your team become stronger, but connections with people outside your team become weaker. Some trust becomes weaker within your team if it's a long time of remote work. Then how do you, so that those are definitely issues, connection to the company culture, and then social bonding, so all of these sorts of issues. That's kind of one area. Then another is collaboration. How do you collaborate effectively with your team members? Especially important is, how do you help junior staff members onboard into the company? So that is an really important question. One way to do so is by replacing in-person co-working with a technique I call virtual co-working. So replacing in-person co-working with virtual co-working. It's working along team members on a video conference call for fully virtual teams or hybrid teams on non-office days. So what you do is you dial into a video conference call, and you start by, this is for your individual tasks. So a team of 6 to 8 people dials into a video conference call once a day for fully virtual teams or hybrid teams, non-office days. And then you sign into it. And then what you do is you share what project you'll work on. And again, this is your individual projects. This is the tasks you want to work on individually. This is not a collaborative task. So you're not intending to talk to people at this period of time. Now, there's a version of this where you talk to people, but this is not it. So we're talking about virtual co-working specifically, where you don't talk to people. Then you turn off your microphones, like we did here, everyone except me. Then you leave your speakers on, like you're all doing, and I am, and your video is optional, so whichever you choose to do. And what you do is you work on your individual tasks until and unless you have a question, or you have an idea that you want to throw out, or you have a problem you need to solve. Then you turn on your microphone and you share the idea, the problem, the question. And then your team members, that's what they're there for. That's kind of one of the reasons you're there working together, is to motivate each other. So it's definitely quite motivating. A lot of people save their more hassleful and unpleasant tasks for that period. And also so you can answer questions. If you're not sure, you're confused, you think you might have issues that you want to address, or you might have ideas as a result of doing this. You can solve problems in that period. Very helpful. And then you end by turning on your microphones, and you take a few seconds to share what you accomplished during that time, which again helps motivation. This is very good for helping teams bond together. It facilitates innovation because you innovate, you have ideas and you solve them effectively in that period, and it helps integrate junior team members. Now, given that, how valuable do you think it would be for you and your team to adopt this co-working model? Please go ahead and vote. Okay, I see that most of us voted. 5 more seconds. Okay, good. So we see that 15% of you find it highly valuable. So Nate, that's great. So again, you're welcome to adopt it right away after this presentation. And for those of you who find it moderately valuable, think about what elements of it you can adopt and you can find useful. Now, let me share with you a testimonial from my work for an organization. This is actually from I mentioned before, the University of Southern California, a big research institute there. It's about 300-ish people. It's called the Information Sciences Institute. It's people who are in AI and cybersecurity. And this is a testimonial from the executive director of the institute. And he'll talk about adopting the team-led model and like things like virtual co-working and so on, and the positive impacts it had on the institute.
Gleb Zabersky came to my attention sometime back during the pandemic when I was planning to have our research institute follow the standard path that all the big corporations are following. So Apple and Google were announcing plans to have people come back 3 days a week. So I thought that seems like a good plan. So we actually sent out a message, said, okay, starting this date, everyone's coming back 3 days a week, and then can work from home 2 days a week. And then I saw a video that Gleb actually, a video talk that Gleb actually gave for IIE that really actually changed my mind about this. And it was a video about hybrid work and how important it was to actually embrace it. And one of the things I was impressed in the video is that all these interesting ideas about how to make hybrid work more effective and stuff. So I signed up for a meeting with Gleb and learned quite a bit more about how to do hybrid work well. And so Gleb has come on as a consultant for the Information Science Institute and has been really helpful in terms of putting us much more in a leadership position in terms of figuring out how to do hybrid work. So we changed our policies. We are much more flexible about who can work at home and allowing people to work from home, whatever makes sense with respect to their supervisor, creating spaces in people's home offices, figuring out how to onboard people in a way that, when people haven't met in person, that is more effective. So I think he's been incredibly helpful in terms of really transitioning us to be sort of a lead in how we manage hybrid work at the Institute. So it's been incredibly useful with all of Gleb's advice, and I appreciate all the help he's given us with respect to moving forward with our hybrid work plans.
At this point, I'll take questions on virtual co-working and Craig's testimonial, if there are any questions about that. Please go ahead. I think the conference room has been unmuted. If anyone has any questions from there, and again, if you are dialing in and you have questions, please unmute yourself or chat. Okay, looks like there are no questions. Good, let's go on. So I'll share another technique with you about innovation. So solving challenges of innovation. This is actually a reason why a lot of companies in technology, which is very relevant for folks who are in IT, decide to go back to the office 2-3 days a week. Apple saying we want innovation, Google saying we want innovation. What happens is that they're using, unfortunately, very traditional methods for innovation, and they're not thinking through much more effective methods for innovation that are actually customized specifically for remote and hybrid settings. So replacing the traditional brainstorming methodology with virtual asynchronous brainstorming is a very helpful idea. So traditional brainstorming is where you get together in a room and you share ideas and you brainstorm ideas and then you come up with some ideas. It's useful in many ways, but it has some serious problems. And the serious problems are production blocking. That's when you have an idea, but other people are talking about a different idea. And you're kind of reluctant to interrupt them because you don't want to interrupt them. Maybe you're an introvert, maybe you're a lower status team member, junior team member, you're reluctant to interrupt them. And you kind of lose track of your idea and the conversation goes sideways, goes to a different direction. That is called production blocking. that happens very frequently in brainstorming meetings. Another issue is evaluation apprehension. That's where you're worried about sharing your idea because your idea kind of sounds weird, it sounds out of the box, maybe it's something that would implicitly criticize another team member's project, or it's in the evaluation stage where you would more explicitly criticize their idea. And again, this is problematic for a number of people like junior status team members and people who are more pessimistic. Finally, social loafing. Social loafing has to do with the fact that the research very clearly shows that the more people that are in the room, the less ideas you get per person. That's because our brain is inherently lazy. It's just wired that way. We talked about the brain's wiring. Our brain is wired to conserve energy, to be lazy, and we inherently, intuitively put in less effort into brainstorming when there are more people in the room. We expect other people, our intuition expects other people to take up more of the burden. So that's social loafing. And those problems have been known for many, many decades. And so this is a technique there was a technique developed called asynchronous brainstorming, which addressed those problems in the early 1990s. It was developed in Harvard. And that was a technique that was used to address the traditional brainstorming problems long before remote work was a possibility. I adapted this technique to remote and hybrid work, and it's very effective. I have a Harvard Business Review article about it. Again, so it's especially helpful for people who are junior, lower status team members. It's helpful for people who are introverted and people who are pessimistic. Now, let's talk about the steps for virtual synchronous brainstorming. First, what you do is you anonymously generate ideas and input them into something like MS Forms or Google Forms or Mural or something like that. Some sort of software where you can input ideas. So MS Forms, Google Forms, Mural, all of those are software forms where you can input ideas. Asynchronicity is very, very helpful for introverted team members and lower status ones. So it's people who are introverted for the reasons that I talked about, because it's something that it doesn't cause production blocking. Synchronicity is what causes production blocking. Asynchronously, you can just input your ideas without them being blocked by other team members who are less introverted or people who are higher status. But the anonymity is really important for pessimistic team members who feel evaluation apprehension, or junior status team members, lower status team members who, again, feel evaluation apprehension. So you want people to input ideas asynchronously and anonymously. And there are two forms of anonymity. One is semi-anonymous, where you put in your name as well as your idea, and then the name is visible to the leader or the facilitator. I facilitated many of these. Name is visible to the facilitator and or the leader, and then the leader strips away your name and just leaves the idea when they combine the form with the other people's responses. Or you can make it completely anonymous so that no one knows what your name is. It depends on the nature of the task. Step 2, you get a spreadsheet after this with something like 30, 40, 50 ideas, depending on how much time you do it. By the way, a nice thing about it is that it's very helpful for distributed teams, not simply people who are remote, but if you have some coworkers in New York, if you have some coworkers in Seattle, like the person got a job in Seattle, if you have some coworkers in India, like Applied Materials had coworkers from around the globe, it's very helpful for those. So then you anonymously comment on, so you get a spreadsheet with these ideas. Then each person gets a copy of the spreadsheet, and they anonymously comment on and rate quantitatively each idea. You have a scale of 0 to 5 and how innovative, practical, and exciting it is. So now you have each idea has anywhere from 0 to 15 in rating. And let's say it's going to be 6. Let's say it's going to be a 6-people team. So then each idea now has 6 times 15 up to 90 points as a result of this evaluation process, as well as some comments. So now you very clearly see which ideas bubble to the top. You probably want to take a look at the ideas that get 80 and above or 70 and above. You can decide your own cutoff scores. And then it's synchronous meeting to determine how to implement the best ideas. So this is a synchronous meeting, meaning that you do it at the same time. So you do this meeting at the same time. For remote teams, obviously, video conference. For hybrid teams, I strongly encourage in person. That's quite helpful for this part of the meeting. And so then you already know what the best ideas are because you have a cutoff and you've seen, these 5 ideas are going to bubble to the top. And then you also have comments and ideas, so you can further improve the ideas in a synchronous meeting. And you can decide, okay, who's going to implement them, the next steps, and so on. There's very clear peer-reviewed study that this results in more total ideas and more novel ideas than traditional brainstorming. And I'm going to give you another video. Let me get this out there. About this specific technique. All right, you should be able to see my video. And this is from the Fortune 200 high-tech manufacturing company that I mentioned, Applied Materials.
Hi, I'm Susan Winchester, and it's my delight and pleasure to tell you a little bit about our experience with Dr. Gleb. He had a big positive impact at Applied Materials. Our leaders and engineers love data-based, research-based insights, which is exactly what he brings. He hit it out of the park. And he used a team-led process, which was incredibly engaging. He introduced us to a concept he created called asynchronous brainstorming. It was a process that we used with hundreds and hundreds of leaders globally at the same time. We did this during our CEO kickoff session for our strategy work. And in a very short amount of time, we were able to get great benefits. I also love the work he's doing to educate leaders around the power and positive benefits of hybrid and virtual working. And one of his techniques that I'm planning to use, because I think it's so cool, is what he calls virtual co-working, where you and as many co-workers, colleagues as you'd like, create a virtual meeting and no purpose or agenda, but rather just to be working with one another. So I highly endorse Dr. Gleb's work. Love him.
So as you can see, very large companies, Fortune 200 companies, are using this methodology very effectively. And I'm going to right now put in the chat a form for you to click for us to try out this methodology together. So everyone should be able to view the form and click it in the chat. There's also going to be a shortened version of this if you want to enter the actual form in the screen. So in the slides right below my name, but you should be able to click the form in the chat. So everyone, please go to the form. And what you should see in the form when you go there is this. So where can you and your team use virtual asynchronous brainstorming? So think about where this can be useful for you. So please put in as many ideas as you have, but put in one idea at a time. So if you have 3 ideas, put in one idea, click submit, put in another idea, click submit, put another idea, click submit. Your name is optional. So that's if you want people to see your name and not. And then we'll have a spreadsheet as a result of this, which I will email to everyone who is attending the training. So you will see the ideas, including the names of all the people who submitted ideas, and you will get inspiration from them, because the way that one team can use an idea, virtual brainstorming, is probably going to give you some ideas for where you can use it in your own work. So please go ahead and take some time, take a couple of minutes to submit ideas. So just work on your own, take a couple of minutes, submit ideas, as many ideas as you have. So again, please go ahead and do that. If you have any questions, if anything is unclear that you're uncertain about, please let me know. Okay, so we see some ideas already coming up. Please keep working. We're going to work for a couple of minutes on this. So somebody's going to use it to expand client offerings and potential new clients. Dee is using it for lighthouse projects. Someone will start with a new project. Anonymous will choose a restaurant for lunch. That's funny. That's good. I like it. I like it. Retention ideas, good. How to prioritize projects. CP says prior to my quarterly meeting, before starting every audit. That's excellent. Planning stages of a project. So please go ahead, keep submitting ideas. Allowing upward evaluation, staff evaluate supervisors. Nice, definitely quite useful for that. Developing topics. Yeah, it's very useful for developing topics. I've seen developing topics, choosing which speakers to bring in. It's much easier if people just have a form that they can submit. So that's definitely good. Absolutely. Oh, another person had similar idea. Excellent. Other folks, go ahead and submit. Still have a couple of minutes left. Developing audit software. Good. Audit design. Yeah, it's quite useful for ideas, brainstorming ideas about improving audit design. I've seen auditors definitely use it for that purpose as well. Especially in terms of dealing with tricky people issues. Developing data analytics tests. Another minute. Good job, candidate review. Oh yeah, that's good for that if you don't want to, especially for people who are hesitant to give their full opinion on the topic. How to improve departmental procedures. Yeah, that's quite useful. And there I would recommend full anonymity, so that not sharing your name, because there might be a number of people who might have ideas about departmental procedures that might be implicitly critical of the team leader. Developing departmental goals, that's definitely useful. Determine the best solution to an issue with many possible solutions. Yeah, so that's, you'll get a lot out of step 2, especially for that one. So take 15 seconds to finish up. Okay, so now you've actually done virtually synchronous brainstorming. And again, obviously this is a very short example, and in the actual session, you can take many days to do this, to generate ideas and think about them over time, see other people's ideas, improve them over time. But this is a very quick way and demonstration of what virtually synchronous brainstorming looks like. So given that, how valuable do you think it would be for you to adopt this technique? Okay, see most people answered. Let's give 5 more seconds. Make your voice heard. Okay, great. So we see this is somewhat more popular than virtual co-working. About a quarter of you would find highly valuable and 2/3 would find moderately valuable. So it's excellent. So again, take these ideas, you'll get the spreadsheet and you'll get the slides and you'll get a copy of my book about this, and you'll learn more about it and bring them back to your team and help them implement it. Okay, great. So I'll take any questions about virtual asynchronous brainstorming at this point.
I've got a question about it. What about,
Yeah.
you know, sort of back to that whole, there's no idea that's a bad idea or something like that. Maybe, there's an idea that like didn't get the points in the initial vote, but really is a good idea, but maybe it was too outside the box for somebody to think that it was a good idea. Is there a way to ever go back to and look at sort of all those ideas?
Absolutely. One of the brilliant things about virtually synchronous brainstorming, and I didn't get into it in depth because we don't have enough time, but that it creates an idea bank. So it aligns very well with a knowledge management system, where each time you do it, you store the results in an idea bank. So we have now, let me share the screen again. So we now have a bunch of ideas. Next, each person would get a copy of this spreadsheet, and they would have ratings for the categories and then a notes section. And then we'd have ratings and we'd have notes on each of these, and we'd have it combined ratings and notes for all of them. And then they would all go into an idea bank, because some ideas, maybe they got a lower score than they should have because they're great ideas, but it's not the right time for them. Maybe it's, we're going into a recession and it would require too much budget, or maybe for some other reason, it's just not a good fit. And so they would go into an idea bank, and you can always go back to them 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, whenever you want to, and so decide that, hey, we're going to revisit them and we're going to take out an idea that we thought, maybe we'll revisit them and reevaluate them. And maybe some ideas that were not, it was not the right time for them at that time, now is a better time for them. Other folks, other questions? Okay, let's go on. So we'll get to a question that was asked earlier about proximity bias. So solving several things that we're going to solve in this section. Burnout, which is a problem. Proximity bias, which is the tendency to value people who are remote less than people who are present. And hybrid and remote accountability. How do you hold people effectively accountable in hybrid and remote settings? So proximity bias. It combines worries by hybrid and remote workers about career advancement and envy by in-office workers for hybrid and remote ones. So it combines both aspects. There are negativities in both ways. To do that, to address this, I already talked about this a little bit, but let's elaborate. You want to create a culture, like the University of Toledo and elsewhere, of excellence from anywhere, like the culture that was created in the University of Southern California, the executive director from the Information Sciences Institute, that institute create a culture of excellence from anywhere, where you focus on outputs and deliverables, not inputs, not where you work. So not inputs, not where you work, but outputs, deliverables. What are you accomplishing? What are you doing? Are you meeting deadlines? Are you doing good work? It helps address envy because it's clear that it's about outcome. It's not about location. So your job description is going to say what you need to do. So for example, for an admin, part of their job description, I mean, some admins wanted to work remotely 5 days a week, but part of their job description is to support people who are in the office and do things like, photocopying and so on, helping manage meetings. So we compromised on 2 days a week in the office. So, and that's what's needed in terms of them doing their job as per the job description. But some people, they don't need to be in the office, and that's fine. It's about outcomes. It's not about location. So if they're able to do their jobs completely remotely, that's fine for them to do their jobs completely remotely. But again, it's not about where they work. It's not about input. It's about outcome. It's about deliverables. It also helps address burnout because it focuses on what you do, not how you do it. And that one of the big challenges with burnout is the appearance of busyness. We have extensive research showing that people who work, well, both in the office and remotely, they often try to do extra work to appear busy, to appear productive to their manager. And that extra work causes burnout. Same thing for being available after hours. If they feel obliged to respond to emails and do work after hours. And that, of course, causes burnout. But if you have a culture of excellence from anywhere, it's a focus on what you do in terms of the outcomes and deliverables, not where and how you do it. Well, that is going to help you address burnout. And it helps provide accountability because we focus on predetermined weekly goals. So let's talk about those predetermined weekly goals. So what you want to do is have small-scale, frequent evaluations rather than large-scale, massive, once-a-year evaluations or once a quarter. So what you do is you have one-on-ones. Already a large majority of people who work remotely or hybrid have one-on-ones with their manager once a week. So what you do is you change those a little bit to make them performance evaluations at each one-on-one. So it helps team members know where they stand all the time and gives them psychological safety. Psychological safety is both very helpful for retention because you feel safe, you know where you are, and career growth because you can be confident that even if you're a fully remote worker, if you know what your performance is and how your manager is evaluating you, you don't need to worry so much about proximity bias. You don't need to worry about where you stand with your career. So it helps them prevent hybrid and remote workers from overworking, burning out due to anxiety and overworking due to this anxiety about career growth and where they stand. So what the team member and the supervisor do is agree on 3 to 5 weekly goals. So agree to 3 to 5 weekly goals. These are the goals I'm going to hit this week. And then 24 hours before the one-on-one for the upcoming week, the team member sends the evaluator a report on how they did on accomplishing their goals, any problems that they have, and how they solved them, and the self-evaluation before this one-on-one. At the one-on-one, the manager evaluates the performance, maybe coaches and problem solving better, affirms or revises the evaluation that the team member gave themselves, and sets goals for next week. And so that all gets fed into a continuous promotion and evaluation system so that everyone continually knows where they stand. And so this is very, very helpful, this system of hybrid and remote accountability. And it's very helpful. There's another aspect of it, which is very helpful for integrating junior staff. So let's talk about that. So hybrid work results in a major challenge, which is that you have more close-knit connections to your own team. I think I mentioned that, but you have weakening connections to other teams and to organizational culture as a whole. That's something that needs to be addressed because a lot of collaboration and innovation comes from these weak ties, what are called weak ties to those from other teams, from feeling of loyalty to your organization. So best solution to this is to establish a hybrid/remote mentoring program. So you want 2 mentors for each person, a senior staff member who's not the supervisor from their own team, and someone from another part of the organization. So mentor from your own team helps junior employees with on-the-job training, with team bonding, all of these sorts of issues that are relevant to their own team to on-the-job training. But the mentor from the other part of the organization helps them with forming connections across the organization, integrating into the culture, introducing them to others at the organization. So that is a very helpful technique. So both mentors met with a mentee at least once a month. I recommend once a week would be great, but once a month is at least, ideally in person. So when the person is there for the hybrid schedule. And you do remote co-working sessions at least once a week. So I mentioned remote co-working. Okay. Now, thinking about these techniques, what do you think? What are your thoughts on these techniques that addressing proximity bias, integration of junior staff, accountability, and this excellence from anywhere? How valuable do you think it would be to adopt this culture of excellence from anywhere and everything associated with it for your own organization? Please go ahead and vote. So about 2/3 of you voting. Let's get the rest of the people a chance to vote. Five more seconds. Okay, this seems to be just about as popular as the virtual asynchronous brainstorming. Excellent. So a quarter of you would find highly valuable and just under 2/3 moderately valuable. So again, think about which parts are going to be highly valuable for you, which ones are moderately valuable, and take them and integrate them into your team, into your teamwork, bring them to your team, encourage them to adopt it. So I'll take questions on the culture of excellence from anywhere at this stage. So please go ahead. Any questions?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
You know, with other universities you've worked with or other orgs, have you had any difficulty with getting buy-in either from the mentor or, you know, the internal department or the external department and participating in these mentorships?
So we've just finished creating it for the Information Science Institute, but it took more. What I find in terms of universities is that it takes more effort than it takes in companies, because in companies you have, how do I say this? You have a different situation because companies are going to be more, you can kind of have employees and tell them to do a certain thing or not do a certain thing, and you can institute employees these programs more easily. Whereas in a university, because it's going to be determined by faculty doing this, you need to have faculty buy-in. So it took about 6 months meeting with a faculty committee and developing a program that would have a lot of buy-in from faculty, because we need to survey faculty, get their opinions, get their feedback, adapt it, change it, tweak it, until we were able to develop a program that had substantial support from faculty who are going to be willing to sacrifice an hour-ish a month, each person, from their busy schedule to contribute to mentoring junior colleagues and staff members and so on. So the faculty were the difficult part. The staff members were not the difficult part. The staff members had their own, it was much easier. But the faculty were the difficult part, but I definitely was able, and it took effort. But once we got buy-in from faculty, definitely were able to create it, and the program is going strong. I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So let's go and have discussion like we had last time. So what I'd like you to discuss is, how can you So from the second part of the presentation, what techniques do you find most valuable and how can you integrate them into your work? So let's have a 15-minute discussion about that. So what techniques you find most valuable and how you can integrate them into your work. What I'll do for the breakout groups is, so for the people who are dialing in, I'll have 4 rooms, choose any randomly, just choose any of these rooms actually. Yeah, choose any of the 3 rooms randomly. So it'll be 3 rooms, choose any randomly. I think we'll get a good mix because last time there were a little bit too many people in one room. For the conference room, again, break up into groups of 3 and 4 and discuss that. So think about all the techniques, the team-led model, virtual co-working, virtually synchronous brainstorming, excellence from anywhere, and all the components of it, addressing proximity bias, addressing burnout, accountability, integration of junior staff. So think about all of these techniques, which ones you find most valuable, so first discuss that, and how you can integrate them into your work. Are there any questions about what we'll be doing there? Okay, doesn't seem like there are any questions, so let's take 50 minutes to do this. So again, if you're dialing in, join any of the 3 rooms that are there. So just randomly pick a room and go ahead and join it. And if you're in the conference room, obviously, don't do that. Let me know if you have any questions, technical issues, confusion. So again, if you're dialing in, if you're coming in remotely, choose any of the rooms. Please go ahead. Dana, not sure how to pronounce it, I'll move you to a room. If you can't figure out how to join a room, just let me know, and I'll be happy to put you into a room. So again, let me know if anyone has any technical difficulties. I'll be happy to help out. Okay, so please let's start finishing up. We're all coming back. Now, what kind of insights did you have as a result of this discussion? What are your next steps and takeaways from from these techniques and learning about them and integrating them into your work?
I think some of it will take some time. So one of the ones I'm interested in is the remote co-working. I think we just need to pilot it and practice it and get better at it. But I really like the concept.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a very useful technique. And I think whether you're tech or auditing, remote co-working is motivating, helping junior team members as well, especially, and bonding for others and problem solving. Good. Other folks.
Say I can add. So I was hired into my job that I'm in currently a year ago, completely remote as a manager to my team, who also was hired in remotely around the same time I was. And as I've been able to network outside of just the team that I serve, I've now scheduled meetings or lunches with those team members when we are in person. So that way my younger staff who otherwise maybe not connect with those individuals get a chance to meet them. So acknowledging that, yeah, we want people to lead their own careers and advocate for themselves, but also acknowledging especially younger staff are not going to proactively maybe do that in their first couple of years of work experience. So don't forget to kind of lead by example. And when you get an opportunity to meet individuals, to extend that to others.
That's wise of you. And it's kind of like you're setting up in a way a light version of the mentoring program that I'm describing. So that is definitely very helpful. So thinking about how to more formalize that and structure it in your organization to create more of those mentoring relationships might be quite helpful. Anyone else?
Hello.
Yes, Tammy.
In our group, we discussed where one size doesn't fit all, and I know you have specific examples, and I was using myself as an example. I was going into a university, a one-person shop, and creating an internal audit risk department on my own. And basically, these examples were not helping me because there was not a strong presence of people of understanding internal audit and what it needed to be done. So going remote was detrimental to my position, and trying to get people acclimated of what I was doing. A lot of in-person interviews with multiple people. When it went remote, it was a tougher time to get people's buy-ins and so forth. I'm not going to go on and on about my trials and tribulations, but it was very difficult being a new person at a new university, implementing a new program, going fully remote. And even going back to the hybrid that we had, because I had so many departments that I was working with, they were all on different schedules. Scheduling became difficult with everyone. Like I said, I'm not going to go on, but I would stress anyone being new into a company, and you did said hiring new individuals, have them, adapt a little slowly, but even being new, even myself, I was in audit I've been 20 years, and it was a difficult transition into the remote world.
I bet. No, it's totally understandable where you're setting up a new thing, a new process. Yeah, that's difficult to break into because you're not seeing people as often. Yeah, so that's kind of has to do with the culture of excellence from anywhere. Your job to do it well you definitely want to be spending more time in the office just because of the nature of your job. So that would be a perfect example of where to do your job well, it's very appropriate for you to spend more time in the office than it would be for other people who do other jobs, like a more well-established auditing department and risk management department, where maybe less of a need to spend as much time in the office. Good, thank you for bringing that up, I appreciate it. Okay, so let's go on to the key takeaways from this inflection on the future of work. So you want to integrate addressing decision-making cognitive biases into your culture, inform people about them, and help them understand it, first of all, where it impacts you, and then how it impacts the broader culture. Despite some personal discomfort about addressing them, it can be quite uncomfortable to address them and acknowledge them. Use the team-led hybrid first model with a minority fully remote. Helps you retain the best talent. It helps you boost well-being, very clearly decrease stress, increase happiness. We saw that from the surveys and the research that's done on this topic. It really maximizes productivity. So people do their best work overwhelmingly, the large majority, focused on deep work remotely. And adapt your culture to best practices for hybrid and remote collaboration, which includes things like virtual co-working, which we talked about, asynchronous brainstorming, a culture of excellence from anywhere, weekly performance evaluations, and a hybrid mentoring program. And to the extent that you have flexibility to adopt these methods, you can start doing so immediately after the talk and bringing these techniques back in. Like one of the participants said, start experimenting, using them, and seeing how they work out for you to help you thrive in this key inflection in the future of work. For free resources that I mentioned from the presentation, so best-selling book, Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. It's so that I'll send you a free coaching session for the first 3 claimants. Then I'll send you the spreadsheet that we developed together, as well as copies of these slides. If you, for some reason, are not going to be able to vote in this poll, so we're going to have a poll for post-presentation resources, which you'll be able to vote in. If for some reason you have difficulty voting in the poll, you can go to tinyurl.com/DAE event and put in your information, and I'll send them to you as well. So again, or you're watching this on video after this training. So tinyurl.com/DAE event. Again, tinyurl.com/DAE event. I'll be happy to take any remaining questions at this stage.
Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions there. So again, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, fantastic, thank you.
So let's just.
You're very welcome.
All right, so.
All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll send you the resources soon.